What's up, MOPAR fam? I hope everybody's having a blessed day out there. Today we are working on the BGE 392 build for Frostbite. Since we have pretty much all of our parts to put this motor together, we're gonna start getting it done. So today's video is pretty much gonna be installing the crankshaft, the mains, the bearings for the crank and mains, and getting the studs put in. I'm gonna try to do my best of going over how to properly do this if you want to do this at home in your garage. So let's get to it. So before I put you on the camera stand, this is our block. This is a factory BGE 392 block that came out of a Ram 2500. As in previous videos, we did a video on basically honing the cylinders, painting the block, cleaning it up, and now we're to the part of trying to install all the awesome parts that we got for this motor. So we're staying with stock displacement. This is going to stay a 392 6.4. So we're using standard bearings, standard size pistons, and we are using the factory BGE crankshaft that comes from MOPAR in these motors, and those crankshafts are forged from the factory. So this does help a lot with building a fully forged motor on a budget, as the crank is already forged. And as you can see, we got our crank back, we sent it off, had it polished, everything's ready to rock. We got our main caps here. We got premium coated racing bearings that we're gonna be using, and we got an ARP bottom end stud kit. And these are the thrust bearings that MMX sent us for this build. Now, real quick, on your main caps, you got 5 caps. They are numbered 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. They have arrows on them. The arrows all need to go the same direction. And how that setup is 1 will start from the front of the motor, and 5 will be the last one at the rear of the motor, and all the arrows need to face towards the front. So that is the order. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 arrows to the front. Real quick, I didn't want to leave this out because this part is kind of hard to see when the crankshaft is installed. Sometimes people get these mixed up of how they go. So these are your thrust washers, and they are different even though they look a little similar. As you can see, this one right here, the tang on the end is a little longer than, say, this one. As you can see, that tang is shorter. Now, these ones are not marked, but some of them do come marked. They'll say front or rear, or they'll have an F for front and an R for rear. And what that means is it's easy to mix it up, but it's not. So this would be the front. Okay, your thrust washers go in the middle, on the main middle, and you got one that goes here and one that goes on the back, which they would call the rear. The short tang, or if you have some that are marked front, would go on this main towards the front, just like so. Okay. Yeah, trying to do this with one hand, guys. So there you go. That's how that would go. The little grooves would face the crankshaft, okay? And then the larger tang, or if it said rear or it had an R on the back of it, would go towards the rear of the block and sit just like that. And I don't know if I'm able to leave it there because my motor's kind of at an angle right now, so it wants to fall off, but you get the idea. And the grooves would face the crankshaft. So large tang towards the rear, short tang towards the front, or F front in the front like this, and R or rear in the rear like this. Or again, if you have thrust washers like I do right now, they're not marked, but you can tell where they go. The large tang goes in the rear and the short tang goes in the front. All right, so hopefully you guys can see majority of this. I'm not worrying about getting myself in this. I'm trying to show the motor as much as possible. That is the part that matters. So the first thing we need to do is we need to drop in our lower main bearings, and they do only go one way. So your lower main bearing is going to have holes in it. That way they line up with the oil passage hole in the actual block. And then there is a little tang on one end that's going to lock into the block. So the block has that same tang. So we're going to be putting all this stuff in dry just for the initial install and torque down to check our bearing clearances. So you don't want to put any fluid, any oil, anything on in between the bearing and the block. We're going to drop this in like so. And basically you just kind of push it down in there until everything is flush. And these are supposed to be standard size bearings, and hopefully everything lines up like we need it to. We've cleaned this motor pretty good, but you do want to make sure where your main caps are going to bolt down, you want to make sure you get in these grooves on the block. Make sure there's no dirt, dust, fluid, anything like that. You want to try to make sure everything's clean. That way when you torque it everything down to get your measurements, everything snugs up like it's supposed to. So we're just gonna re-clean this again, although I've done this probably 40 times already. And I'm just kind of hitting it with a paper towel right now. Sometimes you want to be careful if you use like a shop rag like these things, because they produce a lot of lint, and when you wipe things you'll notice that you're leaving lint everywhere that you're wiping. So sometimes just a paper towel like this, just gently using it, kind of works better sometimes. You don't produce all that lint. So we're going to get another bearing. We're going to drop it in. Make sure everything lines up. And drop in this guy. Don't know about you guys, but I'm getting pretty excited about this motor. And I am definitely going to be excited what Frostbite can do with this bigger engine. Not to mention, it's just cooler when you build the motor yourself. It feels that much more, I don't know, appreciated. Because you put the blood, sweat, and tears in it. Your hands put it together, you know. Yeah, I could have paid somebody to build this or put it together, or just bought one already done, but I don't know, there ain't no fun in that, right? Whole point of this hobby is to do this stuff yourself. I believe, get in there, build it, understand it, and have fun, man. That's what it's about, guys. All right, so we got our lower main bearings installed. So now we're gonna install the bearings in the main caps. I'm just gonna show one of these real quick because they're all basically the same scenario. So you're gonna take your other main bearing, which doesn't have the hole drilled in the bearing like our other ones did down here. And you're just gonna line it up. You got a little tang here, a little tang there. And basically line those up, push it down evenly, and they pop in like so. And just pretty much try to push everything down to where it looks like it's evenly displaced in the cap. And then we'll do 4 more. Now this is main number 2. Same scenario. Pop it down in there. Boom, ding, bang. Number 3. That's money, man. Cap number 5, oh, no, cap number 4. Getting ahead of myself here, guys. Pop it in, pop it in. And the last one, number 5, pop it in. So we got all of our bearings in the block. We got all of our bearings in our main caps. So now we are ready to set the crankshaft down. And again, we're gonna do this dry just for the purpose of torquing everything down, checking our main bearing measurements, and then we'll be taking it all back apart, then putting assembly lube on it and re-torquing everything down to a final spec. Hoi musha! Got you one heavy crankshaft. All right, so I'm gonna try to drop it in real slow. Nice and slow, like daddy likes. And then we are going to snake in our thrust bearings. So again, we're going to put the longer tang in the rear. Or if it had an R or said rear, it would go towards the back of the block with the grooves facing the crankshaft. Just like this is how it would sit in the block. And these things, you just kind of dance them in there like this. It's like a dance. Boom! Just like that. And then we're going to drop the shorter tang in the front so it sits just like this with the grooves facing the crank. So again, if it had an F or said front, it would sit just like this towards the front of the crank. So what we're going to do with this one is kind of do a little drop. And so what we're going to have to do, it won't fit in there right now. We're going to have to push the crankshaft forward because right now it's kind of back. So I'm going to try to do that by hand. I may have to get a pry bar and kind of pry on it, but oh, there we go. I think I pushed it enough. See if we can snake it in there now. There we go. It's a dance, you know. Just kind of give it the old push and shove. There we go. Boom. So that is what that looks like. So I'm going to take you guys off the stand so you just kind of see what it looks like down in the motor block there. So there you go. That is pretty much what it looks like. You can see the little thrust washer bearing dillies right there. You can see the other end of them right there. Nothing to it. Again, on final assembly, we will be lubing everything with some assembly lube, and we would even be lubing those. All right, so we got our thrust washers in. You guys seen how that goes down. Now what we're gonna do is get our ARP studs, and pretty much what they look like is, so all your main cap studs looks like this, and then they supply you new bolts for the side, is the ones that goes to the side of the block into the main caps. Now we're not going to be installing these right now, as we're just doing a torque down to get measurements, so we're not worried about the side bolts. We're just going to torque down the actual main caps and then rip everything apart again, like I said, and then finally assemble it with lube and everything like that when we know our bearing specs and everything looks good. So pretty much on these main studs, there's an Allen head on one side, and then there's nothing on the other. The Allen head is going to face up towards you and screw into the block on the other end. Now we're just going to loosely start these, and then we will just lightly snug them up with a wrench, just hand tight, because again we're going to be pulling all this out again. And I'll probably put a little dab of Loctite on them when we're finally done, before we finally torque everything completely. One thing I do want to mention, which we've already done this off of camera, but all your bolt holes that you're going to be threading bolts in, before you do this, you want to make sure you take the time to brake clean the holes out, blow it out with compressed air, whatever. You want to make sure the threads are clean. There is no oil down in them or any old goo or gunk, from the motor beforehand. If this, if you're using a used engine, in my case, this came out of a Ram truck that had, some mileage on it. So you just want to kind of go through all the bolt holes, make sure the threads are clean. That way when you torque everything down, it doesn't throw anything off and everything works like it's supposed to. Okay, so there is one stud in the ARP kit that looks a little different, as you can tell. Here, let me pull one of these back out. And what it is it has an extra length of stud on it for I believe the oil pickup tube to mount to this stud. And right now off the top of my head, I'm not sure exactly what location this stud needs to go in. It's going to be one of these middle ones, I believe. But for right now, it doesn't matter for what we're trying to do. We're just trying to get this thing torqued down and check bearing clearances. And then before we final assembly this thing, we will put this one where it needs to go. So we're just going to thread everything in with our hand until they stop. So we got our T5 here, Allen wrench, and again we're just going to snug these down by hand. And this one for the oil pickup tube has a smaller. All right, so we got our 3mm wrench here. Had to go old school, guys. My other one didn't want to fit no more. right, so we got that one snug. Now ARP states to just thread these in hand tight, that's it. No more, no less. And that's pretty much even, you know, for final assembly. Don't have to go crazy on them or anything like that. All right, so what we're gonna do before we put our caps on and our plastic gauge, because that's what we're gonna use to just check our bearing clearances. Plastic gauge, you know, works pretty good for what it is and lets you know if you're in the ballpark. And that's what we're gonna go with. So we wanna roll this crank to where we don't have any of these oil passage holes. That's gonna be in the middle of our bearing to be able to check it with, because we're gonna lay a piece of plastic gauge right here, right here, right here, right there, and one in the front. You don't wanna lay it over, you know, an oil passage hole and have, you know, pieces of it or whatever smear in the hole. So there you go. Now we're ready. This is what plastic gauge looks like for people that have never seen it or used it. Basically comes it's like a piece of paper, has some measurements. It's got millimeters on one side and it's got you know, your thousandths of an inch or whatever on the other side. And we got the green stuff, and basically it looks like a little green hair. I don't know if you can see that right there. It's, you know, it's a pretty tough little piece of plastic basically. And you just cut little pieces, you lay it down on the crankshaft, put your caps on, and when you torque everything down, it basically smushes that plastic gauge and creates like a smear on the crankshaft, and then you compare that smear with these gauges on this little sheet, and it tells you what the measurement or what your bearing clearance is. So for instance, this, you know, this one on this side, it does 0.001 to 0.003 thousandths of an inch, and on the other side it does does millimeters on that side, 0.025 to 0.076. From what I've been seeing and hearing and reading, we're running the coated racing bearings, and usually those will be on the tighter side. So we're kind of looking, you know, if you're, you know, 2 thousandths of an inch, 0.02 should be about perfect where we want to be. It can be tighter than that with the coated racing bearings, and you probably don't want to be much looser than, you know, 0.0025. So like I said, this will get us in the ballpark. We'll see where we're at, and yeah, let's get it done. So basically what you want to do is leave it in the sheet and just cut off a piece with it in the paper like so. So that would be one gauge marker and one piece of plastic gauge. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you guys how to do this basically one time, and then you're going to do it for every single bearing and compare. But I'm not going to do every single one on the camera because we'll be here all night. So we got the piece of plastic gauge. It's probably going to be hard to pick this up on the camera. I'm going to try to drop it right there. And we're just going to try to put it, whoa, let's see, I already dropped it. Come here, baby. Saved it. Kind of likes to stick to your fingers, so it's kind of hard to, there we go. So we got it laying right there. Don't know if you guys can see that or not. Try to zoom in here. Ooh, there we go. So you can see it right there next to my finger, that little strip of plastic gauge. That's all you're doing. You're laying it on there, and then we're going to gently lay the cap down to keep it from moving, and then obviously we'll torque everything down and it'll smush it and give us our reading. So we're going to lay down 4 more pieces all the way to the last bearing, and we'll be right back. And then what we're going to do, we're going to get our number 5 main cap. We're gonna go ahead and set it down. That way we got weight on top of that plasti gauge and it doesn't fall off when we're trying to install the other pieces. We're gonna get our hammer, lump it down till it seats. There we go. So we got one piece of plastic gauge in there, we got one cap on. We just got to get it torqued down, but with the weight of our cap pressed down, it'll keep that piece of plastic gauge in place so we can do the rest of them. So stay tight. I'm gonna get them all ready, set up, and we'll be back. We'll put some hardware on and go through the first torque. All right, so we have all of our plastic gauge installed or laying onto our crankshaft. Now we have all the bearing caps on. We are going to lubricate our stud threads with the ARP supplied lube. They just want you to put a little bit of the lube on the threads, and this just aids in, you know, smooth, proper torque procedure, so the bolts and hardware and everything just kind of glides down like it's supposed to. So we're going to put a little bit there, a little bit here. Don't have to go crazy with it. Again, we got to do this again anyways. All right, and then they supply you with 10 of these thick washers. You're gonna drop one over each stud, like so. And then you're gonna get your 10 supplied special Mac Daddy nuts. Yeah, and try not to drop it like I did almost. Run those down by hand. There we go. And these special nuts from ARP, they require a 12-point socket, like so. That is a 14 millimeter. As you can see, short works good on the short ones, but we're gonna need a deep well on this guy. So, but there's that. So now what we got to do is look up the torque sequence and the specs, and ARP I believe has their own torque rating also. So basically they want you to follow the manufacturer's recommended torque sequence, tighten the nuts in 3 equal steps to the specifications listed below, with the Ultra Torque fastener assembly lubricant that we put on the threads. So the bigger studs, which is the ones we're doing up here, those are the M12 studs. They want those tightened to 100 foot-pounds. And then the small bolts that would go through the side of the block into the main caps, they want those torqued to 25 foot-pounds. And you also need to use RTV silicone underneath the head of those small bolts upon final assembly. So they're going to want you to put a little silicone around the lip of that bolt so that when you torque it down, it seals and you don't get any oil coming out of the side of the block. But it looks like nothing special. They just want you to go in the manufacturer's torque sequence, but they want you to tighten these studs to 100 foot-pounds. All right, guys. Unfortunately, my phone died, so I got it plugged into the charger right now, and I had to lose the microphone. So hopefully you guys can still hear me pretty good. I didn't want you guys to miss this, so figured we could at least continue on like this. So hopefully everything comes through pretty good. So now it's time to torque everything. We got our caps on, got our hardware on, and we're gonna basically torque this down so that we can check our bearing clearances, and then we're gonna tear it all back apart and then redo it again. So per ARP, you're supposed to follow the factory recommended torque sequence, and pretty much for the 5.7s and 6.4s and 6.2s and pretty much all the Gen 3 Hemis, the first step is 10 foot-pounds, then 20 foot-pounds, and then if it's a 5.7, it's supposed to be 90 degrees, and then 6.2s and 6.4s is supposed to be 120 degrees. Now, that's normally if you're using a factory bolt, because that 90 degree or 120 degree is the point of that is because you're stretching that bolt basically. We're not going to be doing that. So what we're going to do is we're going to do the 10 foot-pounds, the 20 foot-pounds, and then ARP wants you to, your final torque is 100 foot-pounds. And they have everything listed right there. They don't mention anything about actually doing the factory torque. They're just saying the torque sequence, as in what bolt to do what. So it's not real clear if they want you to do, say, just start right out of the gate and do, say, 100 foot-pounds here and then 100 foot-pounds there. I don't really like that, so we're going to do it pretty much like the factory suggests. So we're going to do the 10 foot-pounds, then start over, do the 20 foot-pounds, and then start over, and then I'm going to do the 100 foot-pounds that ARP wants you to finalize it on. So we got our Mac tools, electric torque wrench right here. I got it on 10 foot-pounds. And we're going to get started with torquing these things down and hopefully get this thing done. So front of the motor, back of the motor. Bolt 1 is going to be this one. So we're going to start with this one here in the center, and we're going to go 10 foot-pounds. There we go. And then we're going to jump across. That would be number 2. And then number 3 is going to be the one right behind it, which currently has the stud on it for the pickup tube. Again, I don't know if that's where that's going to go. We will put that in its right place when the time comes. And then we're going to jump across, get that guy with 10 foot-pounds. And then number 4 was that one, so we're doing number 5, so we're going to jump up to the front. right here. We're gonna hit that guy with 10 foot-pounds. And then we're probably gonna jump across, hit that guy with 10 foot-pounds. And then number 7, gonna be all the way in the back. And then we're gonna jump across to number 8. And number 9 is going to be all the way in the front, same side. And then I'm going to jump across. And that is going to be it. So that's 10 foot-pounds on all the bolts. Now we're going to jump it up to 20 foot-pounds. Up too far. Thing moves pretty quick. Alright, 20 foot-pounds. So now we're going to basically start over, do the same thing we just did. I'm still getting used to this new torque wrench. I'm kind of used to the old school click-clack. First electric wrench I've had, but I have to say I like it, especially when you got to do like the 90-degree stuff. It's really nice. Jump across. And then number 3 is going to be behind it. Number 4 across from it. And number 5, gonna be second from the front here. And we're gonna jump across. And number 7, all the way in the back. Eights, jump across. And then 9, all the way in the front. Jump across a 10. And that is both sets and at 20 foot-pounds. So now we're going to do the ARP spec to 100 foot-pounds, same torque sequence. So we're going to bump this dude up. I'm going to put the beans on it now, baby. Hopefully I can hold this thing still by myself. All right, number 1. Be the middle. Boom. Put the beans on her. Oh, need to put my pin in my motor, don't I? Gotta put the pin in the stand. We're putting the beans on it now, guys. Gotta put that joker still. Alright, let's put my foot over there. Here we go. Bushy, bushy. Ooh, 100 foot-pounds is toy. Woo! That's toy. Toy like a toyga. Alright, we're gonna jump across, hit this dude. Gotta put the ninja skill on it. Gotta put my butt into this thing. Yeah. Try not to move Camera's going everywhere with the motor stand here. Bear with me, guys. I don't want this thing shaking all over the place on you guys. There we go. Alright, let's try to finish that one now. Alright, there we go. Got 100 on that guy. And number 3 is going to be behind it. There we go. Number 4, crossed it. Number 5, second from the top there. Number 6, across from it. Number 7 all the way in the back, about to pass out. Torque that baby. Boom. 8 across from that one. Boom. And finally, back to the top, 9. Oh. And the last one. Boom. All right. Now I gotta be revived. Holy cannoli. All right, so we got everything torqued. Now we get to untorque everything, pull the bolts back out, take the caps off, inspect our plastic gauge, hopefully see where we're at. Hopefully we're in spec, we ain't gotta deal with anything or change anything, and we can put it all back together, call the crankshaft finally fully installed after that, and then hopefully go to the next step on this motor. Right, so real quickly, we're just going to bust all this stuff back loose. I'm just going to do one of these on camera for you guys because it's the same thing for everything, and we will see how this measurement comes out. Otherwise we'll be here all day showing you every one, but basically we'll do the, like I said, we'll do the center one so we can kind of show you the concept of how this stuff works. So we're gonna see, probably gonna be a little bit of a booger. I'm gonna try to thread these studs out and use them maybe as a handle, maybe. See if we can wiggle that calf out. Ah, she's pretty tight. I have to give a little love tappage. Let's see if we can get that thing up. Come on, baby. Come to daddy. Ah, there we go. All right, so you can see our plastic gauge mark on the bearing, and I don't know if you can see it on the crank. If not, I'm going to bring the camera down here in just a second. So what we're going to do is compare those marks with just going to throw these back down here for a second. Compare those marks with the measuring tool, which is basically just a piece of paper, and go from there. I'll bring this camera over here a little bit. And zoom you guys in. There we go. Alright, so you can see that plastic gauge is smeared on the crank, and then it's smeared on the bearing right there. So what we're going to do is get one of our little pieces of paper which has our measuring system on it and compare it and see where we're at. Again, we're using coated racing bearings, so usually from what I read and understand, the measurements will be more on the tighter side than the looser side when you're using a coated bearing. So let's see where we're at and go from there. So let's see, that's the millimeter side, inch side. So I'm going to do looks to be, and again, this ain't absolutely perfect, it gets you kind of in the ballpark, guys, but it looks to be about 0015. It's not quite 001. The center there looks like it got a little bit kind of bent, so it kind of smushed a little bit wrong, but if you look at the outsides, they're both pretty straight and even, and it's smaller than 001, and it lines up pretty good with 0015, and 002 is definitely a little tighter than that. So we're about 0.0015, it looks like, which is within spec, supposed to be pretty good. I think we'll be okay. We got to check we got to check all the other ones, obviously, but let's check this rod cap and the bearing on here. You guys can check it out. So there's the mark. Again, like I said, I think the plastic gauge got bent a little bit in the middle there, so I'm kind of going off of right before that big fat smush in the middle. So the bigger green, that's 0.001, and then that white in the middle is 0.0015, and then the next little green stripe, that's 0.002, and then the white next to it is 0.003. So there's 0.001. We're definitely not that tight. 0.0015 looks to be about on the money, and if you look at 0.002, we're definitely not that loose. We're a little tighter than that, so I think we're good, guys. I think we're ready to rock. Should be good. So obviously we got to check all the other ones, make sure they're about the same and we don't have any issues. And then after that, we finally torque this thing, pre-lube everything, get it all torqued down. Then we'll rotate the crank, make sure it feels good, it don't feel too tight or anything, yada yada yada. So there's that. There's basically how to set your crankshaft up, get it installed, and measure it yourself at the house. So all right, stay tuned. I'm gonna get the rest of these caps off. I'm gonna check them. Not gonna go through all that with you guys. Obviously it's the same thing we just did there, and we'll be back. We'll get this thing finally installed for good. All right, MOPAR fam, so as you see, we got it tore back apart, and we checked all the other bearings, and all of them are identical. So we are in spec. We are pretty much right on the money, so we should be good to go, guys. So now we're gonna put some assembly lube on our bearings and basically redo what we just did, but actually leave it in and torque it down for good this time. All right, so this is what we got. I just went to my local AutoZone, got some Lucas Oil semi-synthetic assembly lube. Works pretty good. A lot of people use this, gets the job done. And then for the bolts for the side of the block that go into the main caps, that you got to use some silicone because we got a red block. I ended up getting some Ultra Red. That way it kind of blends in. If we have any goop around the side of the bolt, you don't really see it too much. This stuff has got a pretty good, decent amount of zinc in it, which if you know anything about oil and stuff, zinc is a good thing to have, especially when you're wearing, breaking in a motor, stuff like that. So we're just gonna put a good bit on here. Smear that in. We're not going to put any up here, so you want to keep it away from the rod cap area and the bolt holes. Stuff's pretty thick. Kind of reminds me of like motor honey. And again, nothing fancy, guys. There could be something better out there, but this stuff you can find on your local, down the street in your local store, and be able to get this late at night if you're trying to build a motor in your own garage like we are right now. And maybe you forgot to order it or whatever, you should be able to pick that stuff up at AutoZone, O'Reilly's, Napa, whatever. You should be able to find it pretty easily. Gets the job done. All right, so we got those bearings coated. Now what we're going to do is drop our crankshaft back in. Yep, we got to pick this heavy sucker up again. Get tired of toting you, boy. Drop her in. And now we got to finagle our thrust washers back in. See how many of you guys remember that. Where does the big tang go? You want to put a little bit of this on the side that's going to ride on the crankshaft. Just kind of smear that joker in. Now, remember, it faces the crankshaft. And it's kind of a little Tetris game, so to speak here. Drop her in, boom. Get the other one for the front, lube her up. Boom. And we're going to push our crank forward so we get some room. Remember, grooves face the crankshaft. So this one's got to kind of drop down like so. And spin around. There we go. Wipe my hands off here, and I'm going to get my little screwdriver and push it into place so I don't rip my fingernail off, because that kind of sucks. Here we go. Bam. Alright, so we got our thrust washers back installed. We can put our main studs back in. Alright, so we're going to get our studs installed. We got some blue Loctite. We're just going to put a little bit on there. Just a dab. And it looks like the oil pickup tube stud, which is the extra long one, it's going to go on the number 3 cap, which would be on the oil filter side and or passenger side of the motor. So it looks like that's where that's going to go. And then the rest are all the same, pretty standard. So we're just going to get them installed. Alright, so we got them all hand started. We'll get our little wrench, run them down by hand, snug them up by hand. And it is, as you guys can see, it's very time consuming to build motors. That's why it's very expensive to pay it out to have someone to do it. You know, if you want to have it done right, there's no such thing as fast. Let's just say that. Oh, the other thing I want to bring up, I know, you know, because it does state it in ARP that you may have to get the block line honed if you run the stud kit for the lower end. That is completely up to you. I mean, it obviously never hurts. Do I think it's needed? No, I don't. A lot of people's been doing the lower end stud kits without a problem, without having to get these things line honed. It seems to work pretty well. So there's my 2 cents, because I know someone's going to ask me, hey, did you get that thing line honed? No, I did not. Just obviously when you put it together, you know, you should be able to tell if something's not right when you start spinning that thing over and rotating it by hand. And I don't really believe that these studs really is changing the angle or anything of these caps very much. Alright, so now we're going to get our ARP assembly lube again for the second time, and we're going to skeet some on our bolt threads, this time for final installation of the crankshaft, hopefully. We're going to get our Lucas assembly lube. We're going to put just a little bit on the top of this crank. I'm just going to kind of roll that in, smear that a little bit with our hand. And then we're going to set our crankshaft main bearing caps down again. This is number 1. I'm going to put some assembly lube on there. Rub it in. And remember, number 1 is all the way in the front of the motor, and point the arrows towards the front. Get your hammer. Lightly tap it down. There we go. Repeat process. Crankshaft cap number 2. They're labeled with numbers and arrows, so you technically can't screw this up, but you'd be surprised what happens out there. Do our whammy again. Number 3. Put some more goop on there. Drop it on. Get the whammer again. Alright, that one's seated. Number 4, a little bit of goop. Point the arrow towards the front. Get the whammer. And finally, number 5, all the way in the back. Point the arrow to the front. And then finally, again, with the whammer. Bam diggity. So this is a good point to check your work. We got cap 1 all the way in the front, arrow in the front. Number 2, arrow pointing to the front. Number 3, arrow pointing to the front. Number 4, arrow pointing to the front, and finally number 5, arrow pointing to the front. So we are ready to put our nuts and washers on and retorque this dude down again. There we go. Scaring you for a second, ain't I? I'm just going to lightly thread these down till they stop. Save us some time. All right, now we get the torque again. So we're going to do the recommended procedure from Chrysler for the Hemis. We're going to do 10 foot-pounds, then 20 foot-pounds, and then we're going to do the ARP spec at 100 foot-pounds. So I got back the wrench back down to 10. There we go. And bolt 1 is going to be right here in the middle, which is where the oil pickup tube is going to mount to. So we're going to torque that down to 10 foot-pounds. Go jump across. Then number 3 is going to be behind it. Jump across to 4. And then 5 is going to be 2 on the same side from the front. Jump across to 6. 7's all the way in the back. 8's across from it. 9's all the way up front. Jump across to the last one, number 10. Alright, now we're going to do the same thing again, but we're going to do 20 foot-pounds. Starting right here again. Jump across. Three's behind it. Jump across. And then number 5 right here. Jump across. And then number 7's all the way in the back. Jump across to 8. 9's all the way up front. Jump across to the last one. Alright, now we're going to go to 100 foot-pounds. Do the same thing again. Alright, here we go. This is the fun part. About to get jiggy with it. Whew, right around about 80 foot-pounds it calls me a sissy, I ain't gonna lie. Whew, there we go. I'm gonna go to 3. I'm doing this with a 3/8 torque wrench, so it don't have a super long handle on it, guys. So you gotta put a little bit of oomph in it. Go to 4. Five. across the 6. And 7. Trying to hold this thing still again so we're not knocking the camera off. Eight. And then 9. Finally, number 10, last one. All right. Whew. That is her, baby. We got a crankshaft fully installed, guys. We're starting to get a motor. Frostbite is starting to get a new heart. I feel like I need one right now. Good Lord. All right. Shall we roll the crank for the first time? Here we go. See if she rolls. Oh my goodness. Butter, boy. It's like butter, guys. That makes me feel good. Yes. Oh yeah. Now with our bearing clearances on the right there, pretty much on the I'd say the tight side, but it's the good side. It's gonna be good. It means once we wear in the motor a little bit, man, this thing's gonna be rocking and rolling. Rolls like butter. Look at this. One finger. One finger. Oh yeah. We did it right, boys. Get you some. We did that. Did that our damn self. All right, guys. So we're almost done with that crank. We got to put the side bolts in. It goes through the block right here, like so. We have to put some silicone on the washer side so you don't get an oil leak on them. There's also some washers that goes on them as well. And then we're going to torque them to the factory spec. And then ARP wants you to torque these bolts to 25 foot-pounds after that. And then our crank will be fully installed. So that's going to do it for today's video, guys. Camera's about to die. We're on like 2% battery, so trying to finish this up. I'm going to get the rest of these side bolts torqued down. Nothing special here. Told you guys what you got to do. But we got all the hard stuff and important stuff done. And that's what I wanted to get videoed more than anything. Hopefully help somebody out. So we're going to finish this thing up, call it a day, and then we'll move on to another step. Putting this motor together, which will probably be setting up the pistons, rods, and rings. And that'll definitely be a very long video, most likely, maybe 2 parts to that, but stay tuned. As always, guys, stay safe out there. I appreciate you guys hanging out on the channel. Don't forget, have fun out there, enjoy what you're doing. I'll see you guys on the next one.